What happens when a company fires the one person who could save a $2 billion deal 9 days before it was supposed to close? My name is May Tanaka. I was 29 years old. I had spent 6 years building something that cannot be learned in a weekend seminar. The trust of one of the largest infrastructure groups in Japan, and 9 days before the final signing of a $2 billion contract, I was called into my new director's office. He had printed an organization chart. My position had a red box around it. "We are restructuring," he said. "It is nothing personal," I nodded. I thanked him for letting me know. I walked back to my desk. I put my things in a tote bag, and I left the building without saying one word about what was written in Appendix C of the contract he was about to walk into without me. I grew up in Auckland. My mother is Japanese. She moved here in her early 20s, married my father, and raised us in a household where you took your shoes off at the door, and you never poured your own drink at the table. I absorbed the language the way most children absorb English, through the kitchen, through phone calls to relatives, through the particular silence that means something is wrong even when no one says so. When I joined Kestrel Pacific Group straight out of university, I already spoke fluent Japanese. Not conversational. The hiring manager nodded in the polite way people nod when they do not quite believe you. 6 years later, I had helped close 4 major deals with Japanese corporations. I had built a direct working relationship with 2 of the most senior procurement directors at Hayashi Industries, one of the largest infrastructure groups in central Japan, and more importantly, I had spent years earning something that cannot be purchased or replicated at short notice. Trust in Japanese business culture. Trust is not a feeling. It is a process. It is the third dinner where someone finally tells you what they actually think. It is knowing when to speak and when to sit quietly and let a pause breathe. It is understanding that disagreement is almost never stated directly, and that the moment someone says that may be difficult to arrange, they mean no, and have meant no for the last 20 minutes. I had spent 6 years learning how to hear those things. The deal I was working on was not just big. It was the kind of deal that gets written about in industry newsletters. A joint infrastructure venture with Hayashi Industries. 2 billion New Zealand dollars. 14 months of careful communication. 2 trips to Tokyo. 1 trip to Osaka, where I ate the best ramen of my life at 11 at night, after a dinner that had run 3 hours over schedule. We were 3 weeks from the final signing when the new regional director arrived. His name was Callaway. He had been brought in from a firm in Sydney that specialized in what he called high-velocity deal architecture. He was 44, had excellent posture, and had never worked in Japan. He had, however, worked on large deals in Singapore and Hong Kong, which he referenced frequently, and which he believed made the entire Asia-Pacific region legible to him. In our first Thursday meeting, he scrolled through my 60 pages of detailed notes without looking up, and said, "So where are we on the Hayashi thing?" The Hayashi thing? I explained we were in the final approach. Both sides had aligned on the operational structure. Kobayashi-san, the senior director, had indicated his team was satisfied with the proposed terms. What remained was a formal review session in Tokyo, structured over 2 days, conducted in Japanese with my facilitation. Brett looked up from the laptop for the first time. "Why 2 days?" he asked. "If the terms are already agreed, why do we need a full day of review?" I explained that for Hayashi, the formal review session is not a rubber stamp. It is the moment the deal becomes real to them. The people who will actually implement the contract attend that session. They need to ask questions. They need to hear answers delivered thoughtfully in Japanese with appropriate deference. Rushing it signals you do not take the relationship seriously. Brett wrote something down. I thought he was taking notes. He was drafting a streamlining agenda. Over the following 2 weeks, he shortened the formal dinner from a kaiseki restaurant to a 1-hour networking dinner at an international hotel. He replaced the second-day structured Japanese session with a 2-hour presentation in English. We will get interpreters, he said, as though interpreters and 6 years of relational history were interchangeable. As though the thing I had spent half a decade building was a service you could hire by the hour. 9 days before we were due to fly to Tokyo, he called me into his office. My position had a red box around the org chart. Going forward, he said, the role sits in a gray zone between business development and admin support. We can redistribute those functions more efficiently. I looked at the chart, then at him. You are letting me go, I said. We are restructuring, he said. It is nothing personal. I nodded. I thanked him for letting me know. I walked out. Here is what I did not say as I left the building. I did not mention Appendix C, Paragraph 4, the relationship continuity clause inserted into the contract at Kobayashi-san's specific request during our second Tokyo trip, 18 months prior. It stipulated that Kestrel Pacific would maintain consistent liaison personnel throughout the negotiation and for a minimum period post-signing. Kobayashi-san had been very particular about it. His exact words, which I had translated and recorded, were that he did not wish to build a house with one team and then be handed the keys by strangers. I did not mention that without me in that room, no one at Kestrel would be able to read the subtext of Kobayashi-san's responses. No one would know that when he tilted his head slightly to the left and paused before answering, he was uncomfortable. No one would know that his second-in-command, Ito-san, had a habit of flagging concerns through questions that sounded like clarifications. No one would know any of the 100 small things I had spent 6 years learning. I also did not mention that I had already been contacted the previous month by a competing firm, Nakamura Advisory Partners. They had been trying to break into the same infrastructure market for 2 years. They had offered me a senior role. I had been considering it quietly. I stood on the Auckland pavement outside the building for a moment. The city felt exactly the same as it always had, familiar and slightly indifferent. The way cities are when your personal world has just shifted and the traffic lights have not noticed. I took out my phone and called Nakamura. Still interested, the contact asked. Yes, I said, I am available immediately. I started the following Monday. The Tokyo meeting was scheduled for Thursday and Friday of that same week. Brett flew to Tokyo with 2 members of the business development team. Neither spoke Japanese. The contract interpreter had been hired through an agency. Technically competent, entirely without context, the evening dinner was at the hotel. Kobayashi-san attended with his team. My former colleague told me later that the first thing Kobayashi-san did was ask through the interpreter where I was. Brett explained there had been some staffing changes, that I was no longer with the company. He said it in the breezy tone he used for everything. Kobayashi-san did not say anything in response. He nodded and the dinner continued. What my former colleagues did not know, because they did not know him, was that the quality of his silence had changed. He spent the rest of the evening engaging in perfectly courteous conversation that communicated absolutely nothing. He was not rude. He was not cold. He was present in the way a door is present when it is closed. The next day's review session began at 9 in the morning. By 11, the interpreter was visibly struggling, not with the language itself, but with the register. Kobayashi-san and his team were communicating in a formal layered style of Japanese business speech that the interpreter was rendering accurately but flatly, stripping out the nuance the way you strip paint off a wall, technically effective, but leaving something raw and wrong underneath. At one point, Ito-san asked a question. The interpreter translated it as a request for clarification on the payment schedule. Brett answered the payment question confidently. What Ito-san had actually communicated, and what I would have caught immediately, was that the team had concerns about the operational handover timeline. The payment schedule question was a door. Brett walked straight past it without seeing it. Kobayashi-san watched this happen. At 12:30, he requested a break. His team stepped out. They did not return at 1. At 1:15, his assistant informed Brett that Kobayashi-san had been called away to attend to an urgent internal matter. That was the last communication Kestrel Pacific received from Hayashi Industries that day. The following morning, Kestrel received a formal letter from Hayashi's legal team. It stated that upon review of the proposed contract, the company had identified a breach of Clause 7 in Appendix C, the Relationship Continuity Clause. The removal of the named liaison coordinator without prior consultation constituted a material deviation from the agreed terms of engagement. Hayashi was formally pausing the negotiation pending resolution. They did not use the word collapsed. They did not need to. In the language of Japanese business, correspondence formally pausing pending resolution is a courtesy extended to allow the other party to exit gracefully. It means we are done, and we are giving you the chance to end this without embarrassment. Kestrel's legal team spent 3 days trying to respond. Then HR was brought in, then the CEO, a man named Graham Whitfield, called me personally on the 4th day. May, he said, I imagine you know why I am calling. I told him I had a general sense. He asked if I would consider returning in a consulting capacity to help manage the situation with Hayashi. I told him I had started a new role. He said he understood, and then he paused in a way that told me this was difficult for him. He said he was sorry for how things had been handled. I appreciated that he said it. It would have been easier for him not to. I told him I was now working for Nakamura Advisory Partners, and given that Nakamura was active in the same market, there was an obvious conflict of interest. There was a long pause. Right, he said. Right, I agreed. Hayashi ultimately did not sign with Kestrel Pacific. The negotiation was formally withdrawn 6 weeks later. $2 billion, 14 months, 4 international trips. It ended with a press release that said nothing. Brett Callaway's position was restructured 8 months after that. I want to be honest about how I felt when I heard. I did not feel triumphant. That is the thing. No one tells you about situations where someone underestimates you and then watches their own decision fall apart. You expect to feel satisfied, and there is something that resembles satisfaction, but it is quieter and sadder than you expected. Mostly I felt tired, and then I felt grateful, because I was sitting at my new desk at Nakamura, 3 months into a role that was better in every measurable way. And the view from that desk was genuinely nicer. Kobayashi-san and I still correspond occasionally, not about business, just brief formal messages that are their own language, a note at New Year, a short message when his company announced a new project phase. In the last one, he mentioned his youngest daughter had started university. I sent back a note of congratulations. He replied with a single line that, loosely translated, means something like the seed planted with care grows in its own time. I have thought about that line more than I probably should. If someone ever tells you they can replace you, smile, pick up your bag, and let them try. The results will speak for themselves. They usually do, and they usually do it faster than anyone expects. Drop your city in the comments and tell me which moment in this story made you stop. Was it when Brett said, "We will get interpreters," as though 6 years of trust could be hired by the hour? Was it when Kobayashi-san asked where I was and then went completely silent? Or was it when the letter arrived citing Appendix C? The clause Brett never read. I read every single comment. If this story gave you something today, please hit the like button right now. Subscribe to Jennifer's Story for new episodes every week. And the next story on your screen right now is about a woman who was told her expertise was replaceable. What happened the day the company found out it was not will leave you completely speechless. Stay right there.